The rusty nails screeched as Travis Bell's crowbar pried loose the ancient floorboard. Dust motes danced in the beam of his flashlight, his breath visible in the cold, abandoned chapel. He'd been working demolition at Pine Hollow Camp for 3 weeks now, but something about this particular spot near the altar had called to him. "Hey, Travis, lunch break!" his foreman shouted from outside. "Just a minute," Travis called back, curiosity getting the better of him. The floorboard gave way with a crack that echoed through the empty chapel. Travis aimed his flashlight into the dark cavity beneath. Something was there. Fabric, tattered and faded. He reached in, feeling something hard wrapped inside. Carefully, he pulled it out. A choir robe, once white, now yellowed with age, and bundled inside. A vintage Polaroid camera, its black case covered in a fine layer of dust, seemingly untouched for years. Travis turned it over in his calloused hands, heart pounding. He knew the stories about this place. Everyone in Alder Creek did. "No way," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "It can't be." Before I reveal what Travis found inside that camera, after 14 years hidden beneath the chapel floor, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. And if you're fascinated by unsolved disappearances like this one, hit subscribe and the notification bell so you never miss a story from Last Seen Stories. Today we're exploring one of Oregon's most chilling unsolved cases. Picture a small town where everyone knows everyone, where church bells ring on Sunday mornings, and where 16 young voices once filled the air with perfect harmony. That town is Alder Creek, Oregon, population 2,743. A place where nothing bad was supposed to happen until it did. Alder Creek sits nestled between the Cascade Mountains and Oregon's rugged coastline. Main Street features a single traffic light, a general store that's been family-owned since 1952, and the kind of diner where waitresses still call you hon while refilling your coffee. At the heart of this community stands St. Brigid's Church, its white steeple visible from nearly every point in town. Built in 1897 by Irish immigrants who settled the area, the church has weathered storms both literal and metaphorical. Through economic downturns, 2 world wars, and countless personal tragedies, St. Brigid's remained a beacon of hope. The church is more than just a building, explains lifelong resident Dorothy Simmons. It's the soul of Alder Creek, and nothing represented that soul better than the saint. Brigid's Youth Choir. Founded in 1975, the choir quickly became a source of community pride. Their Christmas performances drew visitors from neighboring counties. Their Easter services brought tears to the eyes of even the most stoic townspeople. These weren't just kids singing, they were the town's heartbeat, its future. Every summer the choir would retreat to Pine Hollow Camp, 20 miles into the dense forest outside town. The camp, originally built as a civilian conservation corps outpost in the 1930s, featured a dozen rustic cabins, a dining hall, and a small chapel with stained glass windows that filtered the sunlight into kaleidoscopic patterns. Cell phones didn't work there. The nearest neighbor was 7 miles away. It was a place to disconnect from the world and connect with something deeper. It was heaven, recalls former camper Teresa Knowles, until it became something else entirely. The 16 members of the 2009 St. Brigid's Youth Choir ranged in age from 14 to 18. Each had their own story, their own dreams. Zoe Whitaker, 16, was the unofficial leader. With pitch-perfect alto vocals and the confidence to match, she had already received interest from Juilliard. Her sketchbook was filled with New York City skylines and Broadway marquees bearing her name. Zoe was going places, her mother Kathleen says, eyes glistening. She was destined for bigger things than Alder Creek could offer. Everyone knew it. Then there was Benjamin Cortez, 15, whose tenor voice belied his shy demeanor. The son of migrant workers who had settled in Oregon, Benjamin found in the choir the belonging he'd searched for. His parents proudly displayed his choir photo in their small apartment, a gold crucifix hanging beside it. He would practice for hours, his father Manuel remembers. Even when he was supposed to be sleeping, we could hear him hitting those high notes through the wall. Twins Lily and Lucas Wong, 14, had joined the choir only months before the retreat. Their harmonies were so perfect. It seemed as though one voice flowed into the other without seam or interruption. Directing these young voices was Lorraine Haskins, 42, who had moved to Alder Creek after a promising but ultimately unfulfilling career in Portland's opera scene. Ms. Haskins, never Lorraine, always Ms. Haskins, demanded excellence but delivered it with such warmth that her students would walk through fire for her approval. She could make you believe you were capable of anything, former student Alice Jenkins says. When Ms. Haskins told you that you had talent, you believed it down to your bones. The town celebrated each accomplishment of their kids. When the choir won the regional championship in Portland, the mayor declared a town holiday. When they sang at the governor's inauguration, Alder Creek's tiny newspaper ran the headline, "Our choir sings for state's top office." As the summer 2009 retreat approached, anticipation built. Ms. Haskins had hinted at a special performance they were preparing, something that would change everything. None of them could have imagined just how prophetic those words would become. The bus pulled into Pine Hollow Camp on Friday, June 12, 2009, kicking up dust along the gravel drive. 16 excited teenagers spilled out, grabbing duffel bags and instrument cases, their voices echoing through the trees. "Last one to the cabin has to help Mr. Pike with dinner," shouted Zoe, racing ahead of the group. Ms. Haskins watched them with a smile, clipboard in hand. "Walk, don't run," she called half-heartedly, knowing her words would go unheeded. The cabins stood in a semicircle around a central courtyard dominated by a massive stone fire pit. Beyond them, barely visible through the dense trees, sat the chapel, its stained glass catching the afternoon sun in brilliant flashes of ruby and sapphire. Vernon Pike greeted them at the dining hall, his weathered face breaking into a smile beneath his silver beard. At 67, he'd been caretaker of Pine Hollow for over 2 decades. "Welcome back, songbirds," he said, his deep voice carrying across the courtyard. "Hope you're hungry. Got venison stew simmering since morning." That first evening unfolded like so many retreats before. After dinner, they gathered around the fire pit, voices rising in song as darkness fell. The flames painted their faces in flickering gold, their harmonies drifting up toward a sky brilliant with stars, untainted by city lights. "I've never seen so many stars," whispered Lily Wong to her brother. "They're watching us," Lucas replied with a smile. Ms. Haskins led them through their repertoire, occasionally stopping to make adjustments. "Benjamin, support that breath more. Zoe, ease back on the bridge. Let the others catch up." Later, they moved to the chapel for evening prayers. The space was intimate, lit only by candles that cast long shadows across worn wooden pews. Mr. Pike sat in the back, whittling a small figure from cedar, as he did every year, his gift to the group upon their departure. "Something feels different this year," he would later tell investigators. The air was heavier somehow, like the forest was holding its breath. As the choir practiced their final hymn of the night, a fog began to roll in from the lake, unusually thick for June. Through the chapel windows, they could see it curling around the trees, transforming the familiar landscape into something ethereal and strange. No one mentioned how the birds had gone silent, or how the normal sounds of the forest, the distant hooting of owls, the rustle of nocturnal creatures, had been replaced by an unnatural stillness. No one except Lucas Wong, who paused during the final chorus, head tilted as if listening to something only he could hear. "Do you hear that?" he asked. Ms. Haskins tapped her baton against her music stand. "Hear what, Lucas?" The boy shook his head, rejoining the song. "Nothing." Sorry. Later that night, as the choir members settled into their cabins, Zoe Whitaker pulled out a small disposable camera and gathered everyone for a group photo outside the chapel. For memories, she said. None of them knew it would be the last normal moment of their lives. Saturday morning dawned gray and oppressive. The fog that had begun the previous evening had thickened overnight, transforming Pine Hollow into an island adrift in a sea of white. Visibility extended barely 10 feet beyond any building. At breakfast, the mood was subdued. Even Zoe seemed quieter, pushing eggs around her plate rather than eating them. "Did anyone else have weird dreams?" Benjamin asked, his voice unusually timid. Several heads nodded. "I dreamt we were singing underwater," Lily Wong said, "and something was watching us from the deep." Ms. Haskins clapped her hands, cutting through the strange mood. "Enough ghost stories. We have work to do today. The lake trail awaits, and I want to try our new arrangement in the natural amphitheater by the water." Mr. Pike frowned at the window, where condensation obscured the view outside. "Maybe stay close to camp today, Ms. Haskins. This fog's the thickest I've seen in years. Easy to get turned around out there." "Nonsense, Vernon," she replied with a smile. "We've hiked that trail every year. Besides, I have 16 pairs of eyes to help me navigate." By 10:30 a.m., the choir had assembled outside, each member bundled in sweatshirts despite the June date. They carried water bottles and their well-worn hymnals. Ms. Haskins led the group, a walking stick in one hand, a small backpack containing first aid supplies slung over her shoulder. Mr. Pike watched from the dining hall porch as they disappeared into the wall of fog, their voices fading until silence reclaimed the camp. "Be back by 4, he called after them. "Storm's coming tonight." Whether they heard him or not, he would never know. The hours ticked by. Pike busied himself with repairs to the dining hall's ancient refrigerator, occasionally glancing at his watch. By 3 p.m., with no sign of the group and dark clouds gathering above the fog, unease began to gnaw at him. At 4:30 p.m., he pulled on his jacket and grabbed a flashlight. "Should have been back by now," he muttered to himself, setting out along the lake trail. He called their names, his voice swallowed by the fog. The only response was the soft patter of raindrops beginning to fall through the trees. Pike followed the muddy trail, noting footprints that matched the group's departure. But a mile in, at a fork where the path split, one way leading to the lake's amphitheater, the other deeper into the woods, something strange caught his eye. The footprints changed direction mid-path, as if the entire group had suddenly decided to abandon the trail and head into the densest part of the forest. Pike followed, calling more urgently now, the rain intensifying around him. The trail of footprints led him to the lake's edge half a mile further on, and then simply stopped. 16 sets of footprints and one adult pair, ending abruptly at the water as if they had walked straight in. But the lake's surface showed no disturbance, no sign of entry, just the gentle ripples caused by raindrops. They had vanished. 911, what's your emergency? They're gone. All of them. Just gone. Vernon Pike's voice cracked as he spoke into the ancient landline phone at the camp's main office. "Sir, who's gone?" "The choir. 16 kids and their teacher from St. Bridget's. I followed their tracks to the lake, but they just stopped. They're not in the water. They're not anywhere." Within an hour, the first sheriff's deputies arrived at Pine Hollow Camp. By nightfall, a full search and rescue operation was underway. Rain pounded the searchers as they combed the woods with flashlights and called out names that received no answer. Dawn brought little improvement. Though the fog had lifted, the forest seemed to swallow the search teams. Dogs lost scent trails that should have been fresh. Helicopter surveys revealed nothing but unbroken canopy stretching for miles. Sheriff Donna McKenzie established a command center in the dining hall, maps spread across tables where teenagers had eaten breakfast just a day before. "We've never had a search like this," she told reporters who had begun to arrive from Portland. "Usually there's something. A backpack, a piece of clothing, a sign of struggle. Here, we have nothing." The peculiar details mounted. Despite thorough searches of every inch of the lake shore, dive teams found no evidence anyone had entered the water. The cabins remained exactly as they'd been left. Beds half-made, personal items arranged on nightstands, as if the occupants intended to return momentarily. In Zoe Whitaker's cabin, searchers found a journal open to a half-written entry from Friday night. "Something about this place feels different this year. Ms. Haskins is acting strange too, more intense, almost obsessed with perfection. Lucas says he hears something in the woods, but none of the rest of us can. The way the fog moves around the chapel sometimes looks like..." The entry ended mid-sentence. Back in Alder Creek, 16 families received the calls no parent ever wants to answer. They rushed to Pine Hollow, forming an impromptu vigil in the courtyard, holding candles that struggled against the persistent rain. "My son knows these woods," insisted Manuel Cortez, Benjamin's father. "He would not just get lost. Something happened to them, something bad." National media descended on the small town. "Entire choir vanishes without a trace," screamed headlines across the country. The FBI joined the investigation, setting up additional resources and bringing in specialized search teams. For 7 days, they scoured every inch of forest within a 10-mile radius of the camp. They drained smaller ponds and searched the lake multiple times. They checked caves and abandoned mining shafts. They investigated every local with a criminal record. They found nothing. Not a single choir robe, not a hymnal, not a footprint beyond those that ended at the lake. 16 teenagers and their teacher had stepped off the face of the earth. This case gets even more mysterious. Hit like if you've ever heard of a similar mass disappearance, and share your theories in the comments below. Because what investigators found when they looked deeper into Pine Hollow's history left them questioning everything they thought they knew. As days turned to weeks and weeks to months, the investigation continued despite dwindling resources and fading hope. "We're not giving up," Sheriff McKenzie insisted at a press conference marking the 6-month anniversary of the disappearance. The bags under her eyes told a different story, one of sleepless nights and dead ends. The theories multiplied like the branches of the pines surrounding the camp. Some were mundane. The group had become disoriented in the fog and wandered into remote wilderness. They had been abducted by a cult or human trafficking ring. Ms. Haskins had led them away deliberately as part of some psychological break. Others ventured into darker territory. Pine Hollow sits on what the indigenous Kalapuya people called the Thin Land, explained local historian Ruth Blackwood. Their legends speak of places where the barrier between our world and the spirit world grows permeable, places where people can step through and never return. Investigators discovered that Pine Hollow had a history predating its construction as a camp. In 1887, a logging operation on the site was abandoned after 3 workers disappeared in a single day. In 1932, before the CCC built the current structures, a surveying team of 4 men vanished, leaving behind their equipment in perfect order. The lake itself featured in Kalapuya legends as a hungry water, a place that occasionally demanded sacrifices. While official investigators dismissed such stories as distractions, they couldn't ignore the growing list of strange occurrences reported around the time of the choir's disappearance. 3 separate hikers in adjacent forest areas reported hearing choral music where no singers could possibly be. A wildlife photographer's motion-activated camera captured a blurry image of what appeared to be a procession of figures crossing a clearing at 2 a.m., exactly when the choir would have been safely in their cabins. Most disturbing was the statement from Eliza Carpenter, an elderly woman living alone in a cabin 5 miles from Pine Hollow. The night before the disappearance, she reported seeing a tall figure, too tall to be human, standing at the edge of her property, its face like static on an old television. Each anniversary brought renewed attention, smaller searches, and candlelight vigils in Alder Creek. The families formed a support group, meeting monthly in St. Bridget's basement to share memories and, increasingly rarely, new theories or possible sightings. For the Whitakers, Corteses, Wongs, and 13 other families, life entered a terrible limbo, unable to move forward with certainty of death, yet denied the joy of their children's futures. "The not knowing is the worst part," Kathleen Whitaker said on the 10th anniversary. "Is Zoe cold? Is she scared? Is she anywhere at all?" As the years passed, Pine Hollow Camp fell into disrepair. The diocese that owned the property couldn't find anyone willing to maintain it after Vernon Pike retired in 2012. By 2020, nature had begun to reclaim the buildings, ivy climbing the chapel walls, rodents nesting in the cabins. The dining hall's roof partially collapsed from heavy winter snow. In Alder Creek, the story became something told in hushed tones, a cautionary tale for teenagers thinking of venturing into the woods alone. The choir room at St. Bridget's remained untouched, 16 empty chairs arranged in a semicircle, gathering dust. But secrets buried have a way of surfacing, and some stories refuse to end in silence. Travis Bell had heard the story of the vanished choir his entire life. Growing up in Alder Creek in the shadow of the mystery, he'd even dated the younger sister of one of the missing teenagers during high school. "It was always there, this weight over the town," Travis explained, like a cloud that never quite moved on. At 27, Travis had built a solid reputation in the construction industry. When his company won the bid to demolish Pine Hollow Camp and clear the land for a new ecotourism resort, he specifically requested the assignment. "Curiosity, I guess," he said. "Plus, someone from town should be there. Felt right somehow." Demolition began in April 2023. The cabins came down first, their rotted wood offering little resistance. The dining hall followed. The chapel was scheduled last, partly out of respect, partly because its stone foundation required different equipment. On May 14th, exactly 14 years and 1 day after the choir disappeared, Travis was removing floorboards near the altar when he made his discovery. "I knew right away what it was," he recalled. "The choir robe, I mean. They'd shown pictures of them so many times on the news, but the camera, that was unexpected." The Polaroid camera was a vintage model, the type that produced instant photos. Its plastic case was brittle with age but intact. Most surprising was the film cartridge still inside, never developed, preserved in darkness for 14 years. Travis's first instinct was to open it himself. "I almost did," he admitted. "But then I thought about all those families still waiting for answers. I couldn't just treat this like some cool souvenir." Instead, he carefully wrapped the camera in his jacket and drove directly to the Alder Creek Sheriff's Department. Sheriff McKenzie had retired years earlier, but her successor, Sheriff Tom Randall, immediately recognized the potential significance. He called in the FBI technical team that maintained involvement in the cold case. "We had to be incredibly careful," explained FBI technician Diana Winters. "Film this old is fragile. One mistake, and whatever was on it would be lost forever." For Travis, the wait was excruciating. He'd found the camera on a Monday. By Thursday, with no updates from law enforcement, he began to wonder if he'd discovered anything meaningful at all. Then his phone rang. "Mr. Bell, this is Sheriff Randall. You need to come down to the station, now." The photograph lay on Sheriff Randall's desk, protected inside an evidence bag. Despite 14 years in darkness, the image had degraded significantly along its edges, a chemical reaction inherent to the film type, but the center remained clear enough. 16 teenage faces arranged in 2 rows inside the chapel. Their expressions ranged from smiling to serious, typical of any group photo. Ms. Haskins stood to the side, her hand resting on Zoe Whitaker's shoulder. "I don't understand," Travis said, leaning closer. "It's just a group picture, probably taken before they disappeared." Sheriff Randall pointed silently to the background of the image. There, in the shadowed alcove behind the altar, stood a figure, tall, impossibly tall, its head nearly touching the chapel's ceiling. Its proportions were wrong somehow, limbs too long, torso too narrow. Its face, if it had one, was obscured by what looked like static, a visual distortion that seemed at odds with the clarity of the rest of the photograph. "What is that?" Travis whispered. "We don't know," replied FBI agent Caroline Foster, who had worked the case since 2014. "It could be a photographic anomaly, a double exposure. It could be someone in an elaborate costume. Or," Travis prompted, sensing her hesitation, "or it could be something else entirely." The technical team had determined the photograph was taken on the Friday night before the disappearance, likely after the evening service, based on the candles visible in the background and the choir robes the teenagers wore. When they carefully removed the photograph from its evidence bag to examine the reverse side, they discovered the message, written in what analysis would later confirm as Zoe Whitaker's handwriting, in a hand that appeared to shake with each stroke. "We are not alone." Within 24 hours, the FBI had notified all 16 families, plus Ms. Haskins' elderly parents. They were invited to view the photograph under controlled conditions, their reactions recorded for both investigative purposes and psychological support needs. Kathleen Whitaker collapsed upon seeing her daughter's face. She knew, she kept repeating. Look at her eyes. She knew something was wrong. Manuel Cortez stared silently at Benjamin's image for 5 full minutes before asking for a copy to take home. "This is how I will remember him," he said. "Not as missing, as here." The Wongs, who had moved back to San Francisco after years of hoping in Alder Creek, flew in overnight. Lily and Lucas's father stood stoically before the photograph while their mother sobbed quietly beside him. "What is that thing behind them?" he finally asked. No one had an answer. Technical analysis of the photograph yielded little additional information. The figure in the background defied enhancement attempts. Each time technicians tried to clarify its features, the distortion only intensified, as if actively resisting examination. Photographic experts verified the image hadn't been tampered with or manipulated. Whatever had been captured on film had been physically present in the chapel that night. But the most disturbing aspect came from Mr. Pike's statement after viewing the photo. "That's not right," he said, pointing to the background. "There's no alcove behind the altar in that chapel. There never has been. It's a solid wall." Investigators returned to the now partially demolished chapel and confirmed Pike's statement. The wall behind the altar was indeed solid stone, with no recess or alcove visible. Yet in the photograph, the figure clearly stood in a deep recess that, in reality, didn't exist. The photograph breathed new life into the cold case. The FBI reassigned a full team to Alder Creek, setting up a command center in the same church basement where families had been meeting for years to keep the memory of their children alive. Using modern technology unavailable in 2009, they re-examined every piece of evidence. Ground-penetrating radar scanned the lakebed and surrounding forest floor. Advanced DNA analysis tested infinitesimal samples preserved from the original investigation. New witnesses came forward, emboldened by the concrete evidence that something truly unexplainable had occurred. A former forest ranger admitted he'd been too afraid to report strange light phenomena in the woods the week before the disappearance, like the northern lights, but vertical and silent. A truck driver revealed he'd picked up a disoriented hiker on the highway 10 miles from Pine Hollow the morning after the disappearance, a young man who refused to give his name and kept repeating something about the tall ones before disappearing at a rest stop. Most compelling was the testimony of a retired physics professor, from Oregon State University who had been conducting atmospheric studies in the region during that same week in 2009. We recorded anomalous electromagnetic readings consistent with what some theoretical physicists call thin spots, areas where the membrane between dimensions may be permeable under certain conditions, Dr. Eleanor Hayes explained. Of course, I didn't include this in my published research. No one would have taken it seriously. The investigation expanded to include similar cases across the Pacific Northwest. They discovered 7 instances of unexplained disappearances within a 100-mile radius over the past century, including a family of 4 in 1976 and 2 forest rangers in 1994. None had ever been solved. None had left behind photographic evidence. We're dealing with either a serial predator with an unprecedented cooling-off period and range, theorized FBI behavioral analyst Dr. Martin Grant, or something outside our conventional understanding of crime. For the families, the renewed investigation brought both hope and fresh pain. The photograph had resurrected memories just beginning to scar over. Part of me wishes they'd never found it, admitted Lily and Lucas Wong's father. We were learning to live with not knowing. Now we have to consider possibilities that no parent should ever have to face. The technical team continued to study the photograph, particularly the distorted figure and the non-existent alcove. They consulted experts in fields ranging from photography to theoretical physics to folklore. Some suggested a complex camera malfunction. Others proposed more esoteric explanations involving quantum mechanics and the multiverse theory. A few spoke of ancient beliefs about entities that exist just beyond human perception, occasionally crossing over with catastrophic results. None could explain with certainty what the 16 choir members had encountered in those woods 14 years ago, or why they had never returned. The St. Bridget's choir case remains officially unsolved. The photograph discovered by Travis Bell hangs in a special display at the Alder Creek Historical Society, protected behind UV-resistant glass to prevent further degradation. 3 main theories have emerged to explain both the disappearance and the photographic evidence. First, the scientific explanation. The choir fell victim to a rare but natural phenomenon, perhaps a sudden sinkhole near the lake that left no trace, or disorientation in the fog that led them deep into unmapped wilderness. The figure in the photograph is dismissed as a camera malfunction, the missing alcove as a trick of light and shadow. Second, the criminal theory. The choir was abducted by a predator or cult who had carefully planned the crime, using the fog as cover. The photograph was staged to confuse investigators, with someone in costume creating the mysterious figure. And finally, the explanation that many in Alder Creek have come to accept, however reluctantly, that something exists in those woods that defies conventional understanding, something that, for reasons unknown, took 16 young singers and their teacher across a threshold most humans never perceive. I don't need to know exactly what happened anymore, Kathleen Whitaker said at the memorial service marking the 14th anniversary, held just days after the photograph's discovery. I just need to believe that wherever Zoe is, she's still singing. The demolition of Pine Hollow Camp was permanently halted. The land now stands as an unofficial memorial, the half-dismantled buildings slowly returning to the earth. Vernon Pike, now 81, still visits the site each year on the anniversary. He places 16 hand-carved figures around the stone fire pit, a choir forever frozen in wood, eternally singing songs no one can hear. For Travis Bell, finding the camera changed everything and nothing. I didn't solve the mystery, he said. I just made it clearer how mysterious it really is. The photograph continues to resist explanation. The figure in the background continues to disturb everyone who studies it closely, and 16 families continue to live in that painful space between loss and acceptance. Perhaps some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, but merely witnessed. Perhaps some questions have answers we're not equipped to comprehend. And perhaps, somewhere beyond our understanding, a choir continues to sing. If this story sent chills down your spine, make sure you're subscribed to Last Seen Stories for more unsolved mysteries. Hit the like button if you want to follow up on any new developments in this case, and leave a comment with your theory about what happened to the saint. Brigid's Choir. Next time on Last Seen Stories. A family vacation turns into a nightmare when a father of three vanishes from a cruise ship cabin that was locked from the inside. The security cameras show he never left, yet inside, all they found was a mysterious message scrawled on the bathroom mirror. "The horizon called," I answered.